大家好，讀你聽嘅時間，今日我哋繼續讀 Michael Lewis 嘅 Liar's Poker， 讀到第2節啦。咁上一回咧就講 Michael Lewis 佢嘅頂頭老細啦 ，John Gutfreund 介紹呢個人物啦嚇，The King of Wall Street 啦。然之後佢而家咧竟然咧就想同佢嘅頭馬 Merriweather 咧就賭錢喎，玩賭錢遊戲喎。咁而明知道 Merriweather 先至係呢個賭錢遊戲嘅王者喎，咁究竟呢個自殺式嘅賭博係咩回事呢？我哋繼續睇落去。Chapter 2 Never mention money. I want to be an investment banker. If you had 10,000 shares, I sell them to you. I make a lot of money. I will like my job very, very much. I will help people. I will be a millionaire. I will have a big house. It will be fun for me. 7-year-old Minnesota schoolboy, what I want to be when I grow up, dated March 1985. I was living in London in the winter of 1984, finishing a master's degree in economics at the London School of Economics, when I received an invitation to dine with the Queen Mother. It came through a distant cousin of mine who, years before, and somewhat improbably, had married a German baron. Though I was not the sort of person regularly invited to dine at St. James's Palace, the Baroness happily was. I rented a black tie, boarded the tube, and went. This event was the first link in a chain of improbabilities, culminating in a job offer from Salomon Brothers. What had been advertised as a close encounter with British royalty proved to be a fundraiser with 700 or 800 insurance salesmen. We went out across the Great Hall, in dark wooden chairs on wine-red carpets beneath sooty portraits of the royal family, as if auditioning to be extras on Masterpiece Theatre. Somewhere in the Great Hall, as luck would have it, were 2 managing directors from Salomon Brothers. I knew this only because, as luck would further have it, I was seated between their wives. The wife of the more senior Salomon Brothers managing director, an American, took our table firmly in hand, once we'd finished craning our necks to snatch a glimpse of British royalty. When she learned that I was preparing to enter the job market and was considering investment banking, she turned the evening into an interview. She prodded, quizzed, needled, and unsettled me for about an hour until finally she stopped, satisfied. Having examined what good had come from my 24 years on earth, she asked why I didn't come and work on the Salomon Brothers trading floor. I tried to keep calm. I was afraid that if I appeared too eager, it might dawn on the woman she had made a terrible mistake. I had recently read John Gutfreund's now legendary comment that to succeed on the Salomon Brothers trading floor, a person had to wake up each morning ready to bite the ass off a bear. That, I said, didn't sound like much fun. I explained to her my notion of what life should be like inside an investment bank. The lady from Salomon fell silent at the end of my little speech. Then, in a breath, she said limp-wristed, overly groomed fellows on small salaries worked in corporate finance. Where was my chutzpah? Did I want to sit in an office all day? What was I? Some numbnut? It was pretty clear she wasn't looking for an answer. She preferred questions. So I asked if she had the authority to offer me a job. With this, she dropped the subject of my manhood and assured me that when she got home, she would have her husband take care of it. At the end of the meal, the 84-year-old Queen Mother tottered out of the room. We, the 800 insurance salesmen, the 2 managing directors from Salomon Brothers, their wives, and I stood in respectful silence as she crept toward what I at first took to be the back door. But then I realized that it must be the front of the palace and that we fundraiser types had been let in like livery boys through the back. Anyway, the Queen Mother was headed our way. Behind her walked Jeeves, straight as a broom, clad in white tie and tails and carrying a silver tray. Following Jeeves, in procession, was a team of small tubular dogs called corgis that looked like large rats. The English think corgis are cute. The British royals, I was later told, never go anywhere without them. A complete hush enveloped the great hall of St. James's Palace. As the Queen Mother drew near, the insurance salesmen bowed their heads like churchgoers. The corgis had been trained to curtsy every 15 seconds by crossing their back legs and dropping their rat-like bellies onto the floor. The procession at last arrived at its destination. We stood immediately at the Queen Mother's side. The Salomon Brothers' wife glowed. I'm sure I glowed too, but she glowed more. Her desire to be noticed was tangible. There are 100 of ways to grab the attention of royalty in the presence of 800 silent agents of the Prudential, but probably the surest is to shout. That's what she did. Specifically, she shouted, "Hey, Queen, nice dogs you have there." Several dozen insurance salesmen went pale. Actually, they were already pale, so perhaps I exaggerate. But they cleared their throats a great deal and stared at their tassel loafers. The only person within earshot who didn't appear distinctly uncomfortable was the Queen Mother herself. She passed out of the room without missing a step. At that odd moment in St. James's Palace, representatives of two proud institutions had flown their finest colors side by side. The inflappable Queen Mother gracefully dealt with an embarrassing situation by ignoring it. The Salomon Brothers managing director's wife, drawing on hidden reserves of nerve and instinct, restored the balance of power in the room by hollering. I had always had a soft spot for the royals, and especially the Queen Mother. But from that moment I found Salomon Brothers, the bleacher bums of St. James's, equally irresistible. I mean it. To some, they were crude, rude, and socially unacceptable, but I wouldn't have had them any other way. These were, as much as any investment bankers could be, my people, and there was no doubt in my mind that this unusually forcible product of the Salomon Brothers culture could persuade her husband to give me a job. I was soon invited by her husband to the London offices of Salomon and introduced to traders and salesmen on the trading floor. I liked them. I liked the commercial buzz of their environment, but I still did not have a formal job offer, and I wasn't subjected to a proper round of job interviewers. It was pretty clear, considering the absence of harsh cross-examination, that the managing director's wife had been true to her word and that Salomon intended to hire me, but no one actually asked me to return. A few days later, I received another call. Would I care to eat breakfast at 6:30 a.m. at London's Berkeley Hotel with Leo Corbett, the head of Salomon recruiting from New York? I said naturally that I would, and I went through the painful and unnatural process of rising at 5:50 a.m. and putting on a blue suit to have a business breakfast. But Corbett didn't offer me a job either, just a plate of wet scrambled eggs. We had a pleasant talk, which was disconcerting, because Salomon Brothers recruiters were meant to be bastards. It seemed clear Corbett wanted me to work at Salomon, but he never came right out and proposed. I went home, took off the suit, and went back to bed. Finally, puzzled, I told a fellow student at the London School of Economics what had happened. As he badly wanted a job with Salomon Brothers, he knew exactly what I had to do. Salomon Brothers, he said, never made job offers. It was too smart to give people the chance to turn it down. Salomon Brothers only gave hints. If I had been given a hint that it wanted to hire me, the best thing for me to do was call Leo Corbett in New York and take the job from him. So I did. I called him, reintroduced myself, and said, "I want to let you know that I accept." "Glad to have you on board," he said and laughed. "Right, what next?" He explained that I would start live at the Brothers in a training program that commenced the end of July. He said that I would be joined by at least 120 other students, most of whom would have been recruited from colleges and business schools. Then he hung up. He hadn't told me what I would be paid, nor had I asked, because I knew, for reasons that shall soon emerge, that investment bankers didn't like to talk about money. Days passed, I knew nothing about trading and, as a result, next to nothing about Salomon Brothers. For Salomon Brothers is, more than any other on Wall Street, a firm run by traders. I knew only what I had read in the papers, and they said that Salomon Brothers was the world's most profitable investment bank. True as that might be, the process of landing a job with the firm had been suspiciously pleasant. After some initial giddiness about the promise of permanent employment, I became skeptical of the desirability of life on the trading floor. It crossed my mind to hold out for a job in corporate finance. Had it not been for the circumstances, I might well have written to Leo to say I didn't want to belong to any club that would have me so quickly for a member. The circumstances were that I had no other job. I decided to live with the stigma of having gotten my first real job through connections. It was better than the stigma of unemployment. Any other path onto the Salomon Brothers trading floor would have been cluttered with unpleasant obstacles, like job interviews. Most of the people with whom I would eventually work were badly savaged in their interviews and had grisly stories to tell. Except for the weird memory of Salomon's assault on the British throne, I had no battle scars and felt mildly ashamed. Oh, all right, I confess. One of the reasons I pounced on the Salomon Brothers opportunity like a loose ball was that I had already seen the dark side of a Wall Street job hunt and had no desire to see it again. As a college senior in 1981, 3 years before the night I got lucky in St. James's Palace, I applied to banks. I have never seen men on Wall Street in such complete agreement on any issue as they were on my application. A few actually laughed at my resume. Representatives from several leading firms said I lacked commercial instincts in an expensive way. I feared to say that I would spend the rest of my life poor. I've always had difficulties making sharp transitions, and this one was the sharpest. I recall that I couldn't imagine myself wearing a suit. Also, I've never met a banker with blonde hair. All moneymen I've ever seen were either dark or bald. I was neither, so you see, I had problems. About a quarter of the people with whom I began work at Salomon Brothers came straight from college, so passed the test that I failed. I still wonder how. At the time, I didn't give trading so much as a passing thought. In this, I wasn't unusual. If they'd heard of trading floors, college seniors considered them cages for untrained animals, and one of the great shifts in the 1980s was the relaxing of this pose by the most expensively educated people in both America and Britain. My Princeton University class of 1982 was among the last to hold it firmly, so we didn't apply to work on trading floors. Instead, we angled for lower-paying jobs in corporate finance. The starting salary was about $25,000 a year plus bonus. When all was said and done, the pay came to around $6 an hour. The job title was Investment Banking Analyst. Analysts didn't analyze anything. They were slaves to a team of corporate finances, the men who did the negotiations and paperwork of new issues of stocks and bonds for America's corporations. At Salomon Brothers, they were the lowest of the low. At other banks, they were the lowest of the high. In either case, theirs was a miserable job. Analysts photocopied, proofread, and assembled breathtakingly dull securities documents for 90 and more hours a week. If they did this particularly well, analysts were thought well of by their bosses. This was a dubious honor. Bosses attached beepers to their favorite analysts, making it possible to call them in at all hours. A few of the very best analysts, months into their new jobs, lost their will to live normal lives. They gave themselves entirely over to their employers and worked around the clock. They rarely slept and often looked ill. The better they became at the jobs, the nearer they appeared to death. One extremely successful analyst working for Dean Witter in 1983 was so strung out that he regularly nipped into a bathroom stall during midday lulls and slept on the toilet. He worked straight through most nights and on weekends, yet felt guilty for not doing more. He pretended to be constipated, in case someone noticed how long he had been gone. By definition, an analyst's job lasted only 2 years. Then he was expected to go to business school. Many analysts later admit that their 2 years between college and business school were the worst of their lives. The analyst was a prisoner of his own narrowly focused ambition. He wanted money. He didn't want to expose himself in any unusual way. He wanted to be thought successful by others like him. There was one sure way, the only one sure way, to get ahead, and everyone with eyes in 1982 saw it. Major in economics, use your economics degree to get an analyst job on Wall Street, use your analyst job to get into the Harvard or Stanford's business school, and worry about the rest of your life later. So, more than any other, the question that my classmates and I were asking in the fall of 1981 and the spring of 1982 was, how do I become a Wall Street analyst? Over time, this question had fantastic consequences. The first and most obvious was a logjam at the point of entry. Any one of a member of hard statistics can be enlisted to illustrate the point. Here's one. 40% of the 1,300 members of Yale's graduating class of 1986 applied to one investment bank, First Boston, alone. There was, I think, a sense of safety in the numbers. The larger the numbers of people involved, the easier it was for them to delude themselves that what they were doing must be smart. The first thing you learn on the trading floor is that when large numbers of people are after the same commodity, be it a stock, a bond, or a job, the commodity quickly becomes overvalued. Unfortunately, at the time, I had never seen a trading floor. The second effect, one that struck me at the time as tragic, was a strange surge in the study of economics. At Harvard in 1987, the course in the Principles of Economics had 40 sections and 1,000 students. The enrollment had tripled in 10 years. At Princeton, in my senior year, for the first time in the history of the school, economics became the single most popular area of concentration. And the more people studied economics, the more an economics degree became a requirement for a job on Wall Street. There was a good reason for this. Economics satisfied the two most basic needs of investment bankers. First, investment bankers wanted practical people, willing to subordinate their educations to their careers. Economics, which was becoming an ever more abstruse science, producing mathematical treatises with no obvious use, seemed almost designed as a sifting device. The way it was taught did not exactly fire the imagination. I mean, few people would claim they actually liked studying economics. There was not a trace of self-indulgence in the act. Studying economics was more a ritual sacrifice. I can't prove this, of course. It is bold assertion, based on what economists call casual empiricism. I watched. I saw friends steadily drained of life. I often asked otherwise intelligent members of the pre-banking set why they studied economics, and they explained that it was the most practical course of study, even while they spent their time drawing funny little graphs. They were right, of course, and that was even more maddening. Economics was practical. It got people jobs, and it did this because it demonstrated that they were among the most fervent believers in the primacy of economic life. Investment bankers also wanted to believe, like members of any exclusive club, that the logic to their recruiting techniques was airtight. No one who didn't belong was admitted. This conceit went hand in glove with the investment bankers' belief that they could control their destiny, something, as they shall see, they couldn't do. Economics allowed investment banking recruiters to compare directly the academic records of recruits. The only inexplicable aspect of the process was that economic theory served almost no function in an investment bank. The bankers used economics as a sort of standardized test of general intelligence. In the midst of the hysteria, I was suitably hysterical. I had made a conscious decision not to study economics at Princeton, partly because everyone else was doing it for what sounded to me like the wrong reasons. Don't get me wrong, I knew I'd one day need to earn a living, but it seemed a waste not to seize the unique opportunity to stretch your brain on something that genuinely excited you. It also seemed a waste not to use the rest of the university. So I landed in one of the least used departments on campus. Art history was the opposite of economics. No one wanted it on his resume. Art history, as an economics major once told me, is for preppy girls from Connecticut. The chief economic purpose of art history was clandestinely to lift the grade point averages of the economic students. They dipped into my department for a course a term, which appeared on their resumes as only one component of that average. The idea that art history might be self-improving or that self-improvement, as distinct from career building, was a legitimate goal of education was widely regarded as naive and reckless. And as we approached the end of our 4 years in college, that is how it seemed. Some of my classmates were visibly sympathetic toward me, as if I were a cripple or had unwittingly taken a vow of poverty. Being the class Franciscan had its benefits, but a ticket onto Wall Street wasn't one. To be fair, art was only the start of my problems. It didn't help that I had flunked a course called Physics for Poets, or that my resume listed bartending and skydiving as skills. Born and raised in the Deep South, I had never heard of investment bankers until a few months before my first interview. I don't think we had them back home. Nevertheless, Wall Street seemed very much like the place to be at the time. The world didn't need another lawyer. I had the ability to become a doctor, and my idea for starting a business making little satchels to hang off the rear ends of dogs to prevent them from crapping on the streets of Manhattan never found funding. Probably the real truth of the matter was that I was frightened to miss the express bus on which everyone I knew seemed to have a reserved seat, for fear that there would be no other. I certainly had no fixed idea of what to do when I graduated from college, and Wall Street paid top dollar for what I could do, which was nothing. My motives were shallow. That wouldn't have mattered, and could even have been an advantage if I had felt the slightest conviction that I deserved a job, but I didn't. Many of my classmates had sacrificed the better part of their formal educations for Wall Street. I had sacrificed nothing. That made me a dilettante, a Southern boy in a white linen suit waltzing into a war fought mainly by Northeastern prep school graduates. In short, I wasn't going to be an investment banker anytime soon. My moment of reckoning came immediately after the first interview of the 1982 season with the Wall Street firm of Lehman Brothers. To get the interview, I had stood in 6 inches of snow with about 50 other students, awaiting the opening of the Princeton University Career Service office. All through the winter, the office resembled a ticket booth at a Michael Jackson concert, with lines of motley students staging all-night vigils to get ahead. When the doors finally swung open, we rushed in and squeezed our names onto the Lehman interview schedule. Although I wasn't ready to be an investment banker, I was, in a funny way, prepared for my interview. I had memorized those few facts widely accepted by Princeton undergraduates to be part of an investment banking interview survival kit. Investment banking applicants were expected to be culturally literate. For example, in 1982 at least, they had to be able to define the following terms: commercial banking, investment banking, ambition, hard work, stock, bond, private placement, partnership, and the Glass-Steagall Act. Glass-Steagall Act was an act of the U.S. Congress, but it worked more like an act of God. It cleaved mankind into two. With it, in 1934, American lawmakers had stripped investment banking off from commercial banking. Investment bankers now underwrote securities, such as stocks and bonds. Commercial bankers, like Citibank, took deposits and made loans. The act, in effect, created the investment banking profession, the single most important event in the history of the world, or so I was led to believe. It worked by exclusion. After Glass-Steagall, most people became commercial bankers. Now, I didn't actually know any commercial bankers, but a commercial banker was reputed to be just an ordinary American businessman with ordinary American ambitions. He lent a few $100 million each day to South American countries. But really, he meant no harm. He was only doing what he was told by someone higher up in an endless chain of command. A commercial banker wasn't any more a troublemaker than Dagwood Bumstead. He had a wife, a station wagon, 2 children, and a dog that brought him his slippers when he returned home from work at 6. We all knew never to admit to an investment banker that we were also applying for jobs with commercial banks, though many of us were. Commercial banking was a safety net. The investment banker was a breed apart, a member of a master race of deal makers. He possessed vast, almost unimaginable talent and ambition. If he had a dog, it snarled. He had 2 little red sports cars, yet wanted 4. To get them, he was, for a man in a suit, surprisingly willing to cause trouble. For example, he enjoyed harassing college seniors like me. Investment bankers had a technique known as the stress interview. If you were invited to Lehman's New York offices, your first interview might begin with the interviewer asking you to open the window. You were on the 43rd floor overlooking Water Street. The window was sealed shut. That was, of course, the point. The interviewer just wanted to see whether your inability to comply with his request led you to yank, pull, and sweat until finally you melted into a puddle of foiled ambition, or as one said applicant was rumored to have done, threw a chair through the window. Another stress-inducing trick was the silent treatment. You walk into the interview chamber. The man in the chair would say nothing. You say hello. He'd stare. You say that you'd come for a job interview. He'd stare some more. You'd make a stupid joke. He'd stare and shake his head. You were on tenterhooks. Then he'd pick up a newspaper and begin to read. He was testing your ability to take control of a meeting. In this case, presumably, it was acceptable to throw a chair through a window. I want to be an investment banker. Lehman Brothers is the best. I want to be rich. On the appointed day, at the appointed hour, I rubbed 2 sweaty palms together outside the interview chamber and tried to think only pure thoughts such as these. I did a quick equipment check, like an astronaut preparing for liftoff. My strengths, I was an overachiever, a team player, and a people person, whatever that meant. My weaknesses, I worked too hard and tended to move too fast for the organizations I joined. My name was called. Lehman interviewed in pairs. I wasn't sure I stood much of a chance against one of these people, much less 2. Good news. Lehman had sent to Princeton 1 man and 1 woman. I didn't know the man, but the woman was a Princeton graduate, an old friend I hadn't expected to see. Perhaps I would survive. bad news. As I walked into the cubicle, she didn't smile or otherwise indicate that she knew me. She later told me that such behavior is unprofessional. We shook hands, and she was about as chummy as a boxer before a fight. She then retired to a corner of the room as if waiting for the bell to ring. She sat silently in her blue suit and little bow tie. Her accomplice, a square-shouldered young man of perhaps 22, held a copy of my resume. Between the two of them, they had 2 years of investment banking experience. The greatest absurdity of the college investment banking interview was the people the investment bank sent to conduct them. Many of them hadn't worked on Wall Street for more than a year, but they had acquired Wall Street personness. One of their favorite words was professional. Sitting stiffly, shaking firmly, speaking crisply, and sipping a glass of ice water were professional. Laughing and scratching your armpits were not. My friend and her accomplice were exhibit number 1 in a case against becoming a professional. 1 year on Wall Street and they had been transmogrified. 7 months earlier, my friend could be seen on campus wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt that said dumb things. She drank more beer than was healthy for her. She had been, in other words, a fairly typical student. Now she was a bit player in my Orwellian nightmare. The young man took the seat behind the cold metal desk and began to fire questions at me. Perhaps the best way to describe our encounter is to recount, as best as memory will allow, what passed for our conversation. Square young man: why don't you explain to me the difference between commercial banking and investment banking? Me: investment bankers underwrite securities, stocks and bonds. Commercial bankers just make loans. Square young man: I see you majored in art history. Why? Aren't you worried about getting a job? Me: well, art history interested me most, and the department here is superb. Since Princeton doesn't offer any vocational training, I don't believe that my choice of concentration will make much difference in finding a job. Square young man: do you know the size of US GNP? Me: I'm not sure. Isn't it about $500 billion? Square young man: more like 3 trillion. We interview hundreds of people for each position. You're up against a lot of economics majors who know their stuff. Why do you want to be an investment banker? Me: well, really, when you get right down to it, I want to make money. Square young man: that's not a good reason. You work long hours in this job, and you have to be motivated by more than just money. It's true, our compensation is in line with our contribution, but frankly, we try to discourage people from our business who are too interested in money. That's all. That's all. The words ring in my ears. Before I could stop it from happening, I was standing outside the cubicle in a cold sweat listening in the next candidate being grilled. Never for a moment did I doubt the acceptability in an investment banker of a professed love of money. I had thought that investment bankers made money for a living, the way Ford made cars. Even if analysts were not paid as well as the older investment bankers, I had thought they were meant to be at least a tiny bit greedy. Why did the square young man from Lehman take offense at the suggestion? A friend who eventually won a job with Lehman Brothers later explained. It's a taboo, he said. When they ask you why you want to be an investment banker, you're supposed to talk about the challenges and the thrill of doing deals and the excitement of working with such high-caliber people, but never, ever mention money. Learning a new lie was easy. Believing it was another matter. From then on, whenever an investment banker asked for my motives, I dutifully handed him the correct answers. The challenge, the people, the thrill of the deal. It was several years before I convinced myself that this one was remotely plausible. That money wasn't the binding force was, of course, completely utter bullshit. But inside the Princeton University Career Services office in 1982, they didn't let the truth get in the way of the job. I flattered the bankers. At the same time, I seethed at their hypocrisy. I mean, did anyone, even in those innocent days, doubt the importance of money on Wall Street other than people from Wall Street when talking to people from elsewhere? Seething was soothing. I needed soothing. Since I was graduated from Princeton, I had no job. In the following year, while running through 3 different jobs, I managed to demonstrate that I was as unemployable as the bankers had found me. I didn't ever doubt I got what I deserved. I just didn't like the way I had gotten it. I did not learn much from my stack of Wall Street rejection letters except that investment bankers were not in the market for either honesty or my services. Set questions were posed to which set answers were expected. A successful undergraduate investment banking interview sounded like a monastic chant. An unsuccessful interview sounded like a bad accident. My Lehman interview was representative not just of my own experience but of thousands of interviews conducted by a dozen investment banks on several dozen college campuses from about 1981 onward. Still, the tale has a happy ending. Lehman Brothers eventually went belly up. The battle between the traders and the corporate financiers caused the firm to collapse in early 1984. The traders won, but what was left of the august house of Lehman wasn't worth living in. The senior partners were forced to go hand-in-hand to Wall Street rival Shearson, which bought them out. The name of Lehman Brothers was forever struck from the business cards of Wall Street. When I read the news in the New York Times, I thought good riddance, which I admit wasn't a deeply Christian response. Whether Lehman's misfortune was directly related to its unwillingness to admit it was out to make money, I do not know.
咁有3個字同大家分享。第一個字 chutzpah，因為係近代嘅美國作家啦，咁會出現多一啲字，Yiddish 嚟自猶太人嘅字啦，chutzpah 意思即係 extreme self-confidence or audacity， 有啲無所顧忌嘅，敢作敢為嘅，係好極度好 extreme 嘅呢樣嘢啦。Clandestiny 係一個副詞嚟嘅，比較少同大家分享副詞啦。Clandestiny 意思係 keep secret or done secretively, especially because illicit， 暗中嘅私下嘅，有一個貶義喺度嘅，暗中啊。Dilettante 英國嘅發音係 dilettante， 美國會係叫 dilettante。名詞嚟嘅，意思即係 a person who cultivates an area of interest such as the arts without real commitment or knowledge。我哋中文會叫業餘愛好者啊，業餘愛好者 dilettante。OK，dilettante。OK， 好，下次同大家見面，拜拜。